It turns out Governor DeSantis's motion asking the court to step down from the case has worked, but not for the reasons he asked the court to step down for. So I'm going to give a recap. I'm going to go over the judge's decision, and I'm going to talk about why that might be good and bad for both sides, Disney and DeSantis. So first, let me remind you where we are in this motion, or where we left off, was that both Disney and DeSantis agreed on the legal standard that was supposed to apply. And that's that the judge shall disqualify himself in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. And then I've talked about there's kind of a squishy standard here, which is that what the court's looking at is whether an objective, fully informed lay observer, so someone outside of the case, just a person from the street who's fully informed, would entertain significant doubt about the judge's impartiality. And so where they disagreed, of course, was DeSantis said, judge is biased. Disney said, no, he's not. He has a duty to stay on the case. And the issue was DeSantis found two cases where the judge had made remarks about Disney. Both those cases were brought by plaintiffs seeking relief for action by the DeSantis-led government. And the way that Disney came up was the judge was looking for specific examples of what these plaintiffs were afraid of that the government might do. And so he used Disney as an example, basically saying, do you have anything that you can show me that brings you, that causes you the concern that you're coming to court for? Like, do you have what's happened with Disney? Do you have the government threatening to take over your boards like they did with the Disney situation? And from there, so that's what DeSantis looked at and said, hey, you've already made a decision. Any objective person who's looking at this would say you've made a decision that you can't be impartial because you already seem to have indicated that you think that Disney was a victim of wrongful acts by DeSantis or the DeSantis-led government. And basically, Disney came back and said, wow, you were way overstating what the judge did. All he did was pose some hypothetical questions. And the judge said, boom, I agree with Disney. And I'm sure if you're Governor DeSantis' side here, you're thinking, oh man, of course he's going to rule in favor of Disney because he's biased. And actually, I think that this order would make you feel like you did the right thing even more, because you can just kind of hear some disdain in the judge's voice as he delivers this order. And I'm going to point that out here. First, the judge says DeSantis' motion is without merit. He doesn't say that it's unpersuasive or that it's misguided or that it misstates the arguments or the issues. He just goes, there is no merit to this motion. So already, if I'm DeSantis's attorneys, I'm thinking, woo, that's quite a statement, because even if you disagree with us, it's not like there was no legitimate argument. But anyway, judge says it's without merit. He explains my use of hypothetical questions referencing facts related to this case in an earlier case, also dealing with the motivations of political actors, including some of the same actors here, cannot raise a substantial doubt about my impartiality in the minds of a fully informed, disinterested layperson. So that's his conclusion on the legal issue, which is the question. And then now you look at how he's talking about Disney's attorneys in their presentation. He says, as plaintiff aptly notes, defendants rely on cases involving cartoonishly improper judicial conduct. Now, back to kind of slamming DeSantis. Defendants cherry-pick language from these cases to support their position without acknowledging the wholly distinguishable context underlying each decision. So you can just kind of see that it's almost like Disney's attorneys got everything right, DeSantis' attorneys got everything wrong. And then the judge goes on to explain why DeSantis was so wrong. And I'm not going to go through it. I did do a couple takes of that. It just ends up not being that interesting. But the point is, he doesn't agree with their position. So that is why the judge denied the motion, but then he goes on to withdraw anyway for a different reason. And part of me does think, well, gee, I wonder if he just found a reason to withdraw because he didn't want to grant the motion, but he did feel like it was the right thing to do anyway. Going back to before, what my thought was is why DeSantis, this is a no-lose motion, is because if Judge Walker stays on and he rules in favor of Disney, then DeSantis could just say, oh my gosh, it was a biased court. And so everyone would kind of go with that. But if Judge Walker recuses himself and it goes to a judge who's a Trump-nominated judge, which it did, and that judge rules against DeSantis, it puts the court in a much stronger political position where now DeSantis can't argue and say, oh, that judge was biased, because it's like, this is the judge you wanted. You shopped for this judge and you still lost. So with that, I am going to get into the reason why Judge Walker recused himself. And I think it's just a really weak reason as I'm looking at it. So let me get into it. So he says, after denying the motion, my ethical obligations are not limited to what the parties raise. So even though DeSantis didn't raise this issue, I still have to look at it. And the issue is that he learned that a relative within third degree of relationship owns 30 shares of stock in Disney. And then he goes on to explain that that stock could be substantially affected based on the things that Disney said in its complaint. For example, it said that its business could be disrupted, and they were going to invest $17 billion, and now that's at risk, and all these things. So the judge says, boy, I have this third degree relative who has 30 shares of stock in Disney, and that could be disrupted, so I've got to withdraw. But if you look at it, the degree of relationship is determined by something called a consanguinity chart. And so you map it out. You start with yourself, and each time you move up or down in your genealogical line or over, that's 1 degree. So a third degree would be if I'm going backwards in time, I go to my parents is 1 degree. My grandparents is the 2nd degree. A third degree is my great-grandparents. Or if you go, through your own heirs, it'd be you, daughter, grandchild, great-grandchild, 3 steps. So we're talking about a great-grandfather, we're talking about a first cousin, or we're talking about a great-grandchild. Has 30 shares of stock. And so I went and looked up how much is 30 shares of stock. And I'm going to pull that up. But right now, as of today, and I don't know what it was as of May 20, when was this issue? June 1st. But as of today, which is June 5, the stock is $91. So if you do 91 times 30, that's $2,730. That could potentially go up or down depending on how this case shakes out. So we're talking about a corporation that's complaining about a $17 billion investment, and a judge can't oversee it over under $3,000. It just doesn't seem right. I mean, the judge explains why he has to do it, and I'm not going to get into it because, frankly, it's kind of not that interesting. And I've recorded it a number of times, and I just don't make it interesting. But my point is, it just seems, from an outside perspective, just sitting here, even if it's technically right, it seems really dumb. But that's why it brings me to my opinion that it seems like the judge is finding an unrelated reason to withdraw that's not related to DeSantis's motion in order to strengthen the court's position as an unbiased, kind of above the fray system. And so that's my view on why the judge ended up recusing himself. And I think overall it's going to be good for everyone. And so it's the right thing to do. and he came up with the reasons he had to do it. And that's what it is. But I do want to go over Judge Warren and, or sorry, not Judge Warren, blah, 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 blah. Next. It's Judge Walker being replaced by Judge Winsor. So Mark Walker, again, he was nominated to the U.S. District Court by Barack Hussein Obama. I just always thought it was funny when people were like, oh, it's Hussein, we got him. Anyway, Barack Obama nominated judge. He's out. New judge is Alan Winsor. Alan Winsor was nominated to the U.S. District Court by Donald, I don't know what his middle name is, Trump. So he's, this was in 2019 when he was appointed to the bench. Prior to becoming a federal judge, he was a Florida State Court appellate judge, and then he was the Solicitor General for Florida before that, and then he was in private practice. I did look him up to see if he had any First Amendment cases that he's presided over, and I found 3 of them. I don't know if it's all of them, but those are the ones that I found. Popped up on Google. 2 of them he ruled in favor of the DeSantis-led government. One of them, he granted a preliminary injunction against the government. So he's 2 for DeSantis, 1 against. But I did thumb through these opinions, and my opinion on judges really is that I don't think that most judges, some are, but I don't think that most judges are out trying to make rulings on their partisan political views. I really think most of them are trying to look at the law and make the best call they can, and a lot of cases really just sometimes come down to a judgment call. And those are the cases where I think it matters what in particularly, I mean, it always matters to understand your judge's preferences and proclivities. But on the close call cases, I think that's where it really matters to know where your judge is coming from. For example, if you're addressing a constitutional issue, does your judge view the Constitution from an originalist perspective or not? And so those are the types of cases where I think it really matters that you want to have a judge that thinks like you, just naturally, because then they're more inclined to think like you and agree with you. And when you leave a dispute up to a judge, because you can't resolve it yourself, you're subject to the judge's judgment calls. So when I read these cases, and I've read through them a little bit, they strike me as this is a judge that's trying to understand the rule of law, look at the facts in a fair-minded way, and then just apply the facts to the law as he sees it. And I think that's why the Judge Walker, in his last sentence, stated that he believes that the court, I mean, it would be Judge Winsor, would be able to preside over the case fairly and wisely. I think he's going to do it. So a lot of this, I think, is optics. How does it going to look? It's somewhat of the political game. I think Judge Walker could have stayed in the case and done a fine job, but I also think Judge Winsor is going to do a fine job. But that being said, if there are close issues on the interpretation of the Constitution or on political issues, DeSantis is definitely going to want to have Judge Winsor over Judge Walker. But by and large, if the facts aren't much in dispute and you can just read it the way it is, I don't think any judge, let me back up. I think most judges will just try to make the right call, and I think Judge Winsor is going to be the same. So, with that being said, the one reason I think this is a good thing for Disney is the main reason I think it's a good thing for Disney is that it removes the excuse that DeSantis could make if Disney were to prevail in Judge Windsor's court. Like I said, if they prevailed in Judge Walker's court, DeSantis could go tweet, or I don't know if he does tweet, but I guess he did that Twitter announcement. Anyway, he could say this is just biased judge. Now we can't really do that because it's the judge that he shopped for. So that's a big benefit to Disney. The big benefit to DeSantis, like I just mentioned, is if there are any close calls, I would rather have Judge Winsor if I were on DeSantis' side. I would rather have Judge Walker if I was on Disney's side. DeSantis is getting what he wants in this situation. So it's good for both of them, I think, in the long run. And I, again, think that's why Judge Walker decided that he needed to recuse himself, using the third degree 30 shares of Disney issue as an excuse. That's the way I view it. Let me know what you think. Do you think the judge was just biased? Do you think his reason is good? What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments.